what we'll do now is have a short panel discussion, short or long, interactive as possible, and I'd like to welcome all of you afterward to ask whatever questions that you might have. I think that the idea of somehow linking these books together too closely might be fruitless, but if there is one thing that I do see them all as having in common, can you hear me? Yes? Yes. If there is a point in common that I see in the various readings that you've just heard, it's of course the intersection between reportage or journalism and fiction. And I think all three of the writers here have an experience with both. I would say certainly Sabine has worked as a journalist and here has written a novel. I think Ilija has worked in both directions. And I don't know, Witold, whether you have worked in...
I'm focused on non-fiction only.
On non-fiction only, which is
so
the most...
I've never touched fiction.
Which is the most fictional category of all, I think, sometimes, you know? I mean, and I say that in all seriousness.
I wouldn't say so, but we can discuss that later.
Certainly. And I guess that would be the first question that I would have to ask. Why, for example, Sabine, why did you choose to write what is a novel that takes place in three different dimensions? A frame story in 1990, a diary which takes place in 1978 in Italy, and then a further discovery of the 1930s. A lot of the information that you relayed is information from the news. It is regarding both the rise of fascism in Italy and the years of terrorism, the so-called years of lead in the 1970s. And you related them in the form of a novel. Why did you make that decision?
Ich muss auf Deutsch antworten und Frau Steinberg übersetzt netterweise. Ich verstehe zwar sehr gut Englisch, aber ich spreche es ganz, ganz schlecht und es ist besser, sie übersetzt. Also ich finde, der Roman ist die ideale Form, um Geschichte zu transportieren, um politische Inhalte auch zu transportieren, weil er die Möglichkeit bietet, verschiedenste Perspektiven und Widersprüche zu vereinen. Und ich habe also versucht, sowohl verschiedene historische Ebenen reinzubringen, die miteinander zu verknüpfen, also die Geschichte Italiens nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg, die Geschichte der Geheimdienste, der Fluchtwege der Nazis, mit der Zeit des Kalten Krieges Ende der 70er Jahre und das Ganze sozusagen aufgeteilt auf verschiedene Figuren.
Okay, I think that the novel is the ideal form to transport history and political thought. So, because in the novel you can convey conflicts and antagonisms, and in my book I chose the novel to combine aspects of the Italian history after the Second World War. I was dealing with the secret services and the history of the Nazis as well as the Cold War.
Vielleicht noch zu ergänzen, die verschiedenen Perspektiven, also dass man aus verschiedenen
that one can, exactly. That this can be told from different perspectives, from different protagonists, and piece together a multifaceted entity.
And I think that the period that you talk about, certainly the 1970s, is one of the most controversial periods today. Italy is very strange. And whereas in the United States we have a kind of plethora of non-fiction works about politics, about recent politics. Every president, every member of his cabinet seems to write a memoir. But events as recently, let's say, as for example the whole Mani Pulite, the whole clean hands crisis, there's no Benedetto Craxi, you know, a very important political figure in Italy, the head of the Socialist Party, a very powerful man who was forced into exile. There's no biography of him.
Das ist keine Biografie von Craxi.
And I was wondering if perhaps I'm thinking also a little bit of Garcia Marquez, who talked about journalism being the best form of fiction in a certain sense, but also authors having to write what journalists were not able to write, and to tell a history that historians had not told. I'm wondering if you felt some of that responsibility in taking on this subject matter.
dass sie eine Verantwortung gespürt haben, Geschichte zu vermitteln im fiktionalen Raum.
Ja, also, dass es keine Biografie von Craxi gibt, das ist mir jetzt ganz neu, ehrlich gesagt. Aber ich könnte mir vorstellen, dass es vermutlich auch noch lange Zeit braucht, bis es eine wahrheitsgetreue Biografie von Berlusconi gibt.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been aware of the fact that there has not been a biography about Craxi at this point, but it might also take quite a while until there's a truthful account of Mr. Berlusconi.
There actually are some good ones, actually, that I could point you to. Witold, I was actually complimenting you when I said that there's nothing more fictional than non-fiction, in a way. Certainly.
What did you mean? That's the time to explain. But maybe I will start with clarifying something, if I can. I represent something what we call the Polish School of Reportage. And authors who are not members, but authors who try to follow this school, we are combining fiction, we are combining non-fiction, we are combining the facts, true stories, but with the literature way of writing. So what we are trying to do is that using all the best things that we have taken from the literature, we try to build as good story as possible, but based on facts. So now you explain what you meant.
No, that's, you've already explained it. I think that I am genuinely troubled sometimes by how difficult it is to get to the truth of matters. I should explain I work as a translator and interpreter at the United Nations, and I arrived there from having done literary studies in Italian. And I thought that when I got to the UN, I would finally understand reality. And I find that I understand, as an interpreter, of course, you're in the room, you're the fly on the wall, you see the discussions. And I find that the closer I get to the seats of power, the less I understand. And so I think that a certain amount of fictionalizing is necessary in order to write nonfiction.
So I had similar experience because this book, the Assassin from Apricot City, is it's written because of my youth enthusiasm. Most of the material I had was I did the research when I was hitchhiking in Turkey as a student. When I was 23 or 24, I hitchhiked the whole way from Warsaw to Jerusalem and back, spending like 2 months in Turkey. Then I went there for a scholarship, and I was, after a few weeks and after that first 2 months, and then after few weeks of being a student there, I thought I understood the country pretty well. And then that was the best moment to write a book, actually, because then the more you know, the less, the worse you feel, actually, about yourself. So now I would probably never write such a book. Yeah, because I don't feel an expert about Turkey. I spend there more than a year. I'm going there every year, at least twice. But the more I'm going there, the less I know.
No, I certainly understand that uncertainty. I felt nervous just reading your biographies, sitting in front of me.
There were loads of mistakes.
I'm sure. I was looking at you actually as I did it, thinking how many things am I getting wrong here. I dislike biography for some reason, or reading people's biographies in front of them, because of course you could explain yourselves much better than I ever could. Yeah.
But maybe just to say one thing about that, there is a general misunderstanding that biography is non-fiction.
Yes.
Now you mentioned Sir Richard Francis Burton.
Yes.
There are 11 biographies written on him, and they differ on every important aspect of his life. Just to give you one example, late in his life he married a very pious Catholic woman, and one biography says this was a marriage made in hell. The other biography says rarely were two people less suited for one another. And this runs through all aspects of his life, his work, and so on. So I don't actually think that there's such a clear difference between fiction and non-fiction. I think what is more relevant is the relationship between research and poetics. And there are fiction authors who do hardly any research, and there are others, like myself and like Sabine, who base everything we do on research. Now, once you've based it on very profound, sometimes maybe even exaggerated, obsessive research, the question as to how you then transform it into language, what level of, let's say, literary freedom you use, like you said, is a gradual kind of exercise depending on many aspects that I think are not existentially relevant. It's more a decision that comes out of the theme, out of the subject matter, depends what you want to write about. There's of course one major difference, and that is in fiction you base most things on the characters. So just to give you one example, I'm currently working on a subject that is similar to a non-fiction book I wrote, Secret Service, surveillance, state and resistance. Now in the novel, by trying to enter the mind of a Secret Service agent and apparatchik, I'm of course forced to reach another level of empathy than when writing a purely non-fictional political pamphlet, for example. So it's also a question of the input that as an author you have to come up with in order to achieve the necessity that fiction writing commands or that non-fiction writing commands.
In the novel that you're presenting tonight, Ice Melt, it wasn't until I heard you speaking last night that I realized that it was a novel. It's written in the first person. It sounded, I didn't know you, so of course when I heard you last night I knew that you couldn't be this curmudgeon who's sort of being described, this character of Zeno, at least in the excerpt that's available to us, this hater of humanity, really, in those first pages.
Yeah, well, I would disagree there, but anyway, go on.
Well, but you know more about him than I. I mean, I'm going on, certainly, you're describing this picture of decay.
Well, I think it's a general misunderstanding to believe that someone who hates civilization is thus someone who hates mankind. Because you would assume that our form of civilization is the only one that is possible for mankind. I think that would be a rather grim and pessimistic outlook. So no, he is someone who is, because the glacier he worked on all his life is melting, is more or less dying. He's someone who's terribly hurt, frustrated, sad, and therefore he develops a hatred for our form of civilization.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go that general. I mean, I'm just basing myself on a reading of 10 pages, where he is extremely irritated in a train. I can start with the other passengers and what they're reading and with the way they're blocking the landscape and with the way that they're completely ignorant of something that is very deeply disturbing to the narrator. And then when he comes across this glacier that has disappeared and crumbles, really, a hiker comes by who's very cheerful and tries to comfort him, and he lashes out at the hiker. So I'm speaking very specifically to that as opposed to any general statement about humanity.
Yeah. You know, he's hurt, so when you're hurt, you lash out.
Mm-hmm. And in this is, I can't think of anything more difficult, really, than to write a novel about the destruction of the environment. I mean, it's a terrible subject, of course. And it's not a sexy subject in the sort of American sense of an appealing subject, something that you could build a romance around.
But you would agree it's a pertinent subject?
Excuse me?
You would agree that it's a pertinent subject?
Absolutely, but pertinence does not necessarily lend itself to a novel. I mean, this must have been a challenge for you.
I would greatly disagree.
Please.
I actually think that one of the things that worries me about contemporary literature is the lack of pertinence. I mean, there's so many stories of people who are basically autists who just describe their own small world and do not reach out to larger issues. And those larger issues could be political, cultural, economic. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be political, but to me there has to be some form of both the holistic perspective and metaphysics. If it's kind of the small nitty-gritty of a reasonably uninteresting existence of a petit bourgeois in today's world, it doesn't interest me as a reader, and therefore it's not something I want to become involved in as a writer. I actually think we need more pertinence, and I actually think one of the chances that literature has, because we have to admit as fiction writers that we have been losing relevance for a while now, and one of I think the ways to become relevant again is to actually approach these huge, massive challenges that mankind faces at the moment, and certainly destruction of nature would be one of them.
Sabine, would you like to follow up on any of that?
Also er hatte gesagt, dass die einzige
Specifically in terms of pertinence,
die einzige Wichtigkeit für Literatur ist, dass man sich den großen Themen widmet, die jetzt also zum Beispiel Umwelt und so weiter. Ob Sie das auch sehen?
Also man kann sich immer nur mit den Themen beschäftigen, die einen selbst beschäftigen. Und bei mir sind es natürlich auch gesellschaftskritische Themen, historisch-politische Themen.
Well, I believe one can only really deal with the subject matter that concerns the writer on a personal level, and in my case, those are political and social subjects.
Aber zur Frage, was Fiktion ist und was dann der Wahrheit entspricht, das Interessante ist, also wenn der Leser oder die Leserin sich bis zum Schluss fragen muss, was ist jetzt erfunden und was ist gefunden.
But the question about the truthfulness of fiction, it is very interesting if the reader has to the very end ask him or herself, what is the truth and what is fiction?
Und es gibt in meinem Roman einen Nachtrag, und zwar die Hauptfigur stirbt am 7. Januar 2011 und ist in Rom begraben, und dann gibt es noch einen Satz, dass Priebke von der, wie heißt die Neonazi-Partei in Deutschland, NDP glaube ich, nach dem Rücktritt von Köhler, von Staatspräsident Köhler in Deutschland, kurz als Präsidentschaftskandidat sozusagen aufgestellt wurde oder ins Gespräch gebracht wurde. Und diese beiden Sätze stehen am Ende des Romans, und mich haben dann Leser und Leserinnen gefragt, wo Emma Manente genau begraben liegt, am Campo Verano. Und manche haben dann geglaubt, diese Geschichte mit Priebke sei erfunden, und in Wirklichkeit ist es genau umgekehrt. Der Todestag ist erfunden, und diese Idee der Neonazi-Partei, Priebke als Präsidentschaftskandidaten ins Gespräch zu bringen, das war tatsächlich der Fall.
So my book has an epilogue, and one of the main protagonists, Emma Manente, she dies in my book on January 7th, 2011, and is buried in Rome. And at the same time, I do refer to Priebke, the man who was in charge of the massacre, or was one of the men in charge of the massacre, that at his very advanced age, he had been suggested by the NDP, which is a very right-wing or almost fascist party in Germany, neo-Nazi party. They, when the former president, German president, Mr. Kohler, had to when he was stepping back, they suggested that Mr. Priebke should take over the job, and people really confused in the end often asked me, like, where truly has Emma Manente been buried? But she's a fictional person, and at the same time they thought that Priebke could possibly function as the president of Germany. They thought this was an invention, and it had been actually a proposal by the very right-wing party. So these two matters of fiction and reality were kind of reversed.
It's a complicated grey zone. I was thinking while you were speaking of Kapuscinski, and
I was just about to talk about him.
Please, fire away.
No, but
I just want to ask you one question, then maybe you can clarify that. You've certainly read his book on Ethiopia.
yeah.
Now the interesting thing there is that it's really a grey zone between fact and fiction, and that the fact that he makes actually mistakes, or he attributes things to Ethiopia that are not historically true, doesn't lessen the strength of the book. So it's really a very complicated, don't you think, complicated give and take.
I think it is, but what we observe in Poland, can I go to your question, but a little bit round? What we observe in Poland, and I don't know how it looks in other European markets or in American market, in book market I mean, but in Poland more and more people is interested in buying non-fiction books. I mean, there is something in the air that makes people quiet reading fiction books, and they're getting more and more interested in non-fiction. Probably one of the reasons that Polish market might be very specific, because we really have, like, we had Kapuściński, who was a very strong personality, who was like known in many countries, and we have had many followers of Kapuściński. But I think that the fiction in the changing world, in the world that in Facebook, everybody's real and fake at the same time, and the world is becoming more and more fake, and you don't know what is true and what is not true anymore. So people are looking for the true stories. And now answering to your question, I really don't like that he did these mistakes. I mean, this is not what we expected him to do. Of course, the book about I don't know the English title of the book, about the Ethiopia. It's
King of Kings.
Oh, King of Kings.
Okay, so King of Kings was a great book, and there were many aspects, right? It was just a masterpiece. You know that it's not only about Haile Selassie, but it was written in 70s. It was about Gierek, the secretary of the Communist Party. So people reading that book in Poland were reading about Haile Selassie and finding similarities between Haile Selassie and Gierek, what was awesome for them. And at the same time, there were some people in Great Britain reading that book and finding similarities between Haile Selassie and the director of theater in one provincial city. So that's amazing. That was not only about Haile Selassie, that was about power in general. But still, I feel that because of Kapuściński, we lost a lot of... People trust us. As a non-fiction writer, I must say, because I'm working my non-fiction pieces for Gazeta Wyborcza, for its weekly supplement, and I must say that people trust us, and this trustment is extremely important for us. So since we have this biography of Kapuściński, where many of his small and bigger lies came out, the trustment is shaking, and that's horrible.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because if he had labeled it a novel, you couldn't have said those are lies, could you?
Why didn't he just write a novel? That would be enough. That would be fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical. I mean, Hollywood always likes labeling films based on a true story, which always kind of rubs me.
Dan Brown, yeah.
Yeah, it rubs me the wrong way, because I'm thinking, well, if it's based on a true story, then the film itself must be a false story, logically. So in a way, it's implying that there's some kind of, it's a simplistic, implying something very simplistic, that there is one-dimensional truth, and that this serves as a foundation for a fictional account.
Nobody wouldn't mind if he wrote a note, right? This is based on true, but this is just partly true. The literature way of writing is more important than facts in this case. But I travel with my book around Poland, and many people in many places that they tell me that this is so important for them that we write true, that it's really based on facts and we don't overuse it.
There's another dimension to that too, which is the fact that all three of you are writers in translation. And when we look at literature available in translation, books available in translation, first of all, the percentages are extremely low in the United States. And it tends to be relegated primarily to fiction. To fiction, very little nonfiction, except for perhaps textbooks, is translated into English. And when it is, when we're looking, for example, at expository prose, at reportage, huge changes then are demanded, huge cuts. to conform to American readers' expectations. But I think it's sort of very bizarre that actually one of the areas that is most interesting, and which publishers in general are most interested in also for commercial reasons, is almost forbidden to non-English writing writers. I don't know if you have come across that in your dealings with publishers at all, or in your attempts to get nonfiction published in the United States or in England.
I don't know, for me it was rather quick. I mean, I'm not published in US yet. Hope I will, but for United Kingdom it came pretty quick for me. I'm really thankful for my translator, Antonia Lloyd-Jones. She's doing a great job for this book, but I don't have any bad experiences.
Sabine, have you been published in languages other than German and English?
Türkisch, Schwedisch, Italienisch, Russisch.
The same book, or?
No. Dieses Buch in Türkisch und in Englisch und jetzt auf Italienisch demnächst und andere Bücher auf Schwedisch, Russisch, Slowakisch.
Okay,
Das versteht man.
That's on top of
No, I do find it something alarming. I think the first things that I translated were nonfiction, and it was about the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the whole narrative style was so different because everything was being presented in terms of absolute uncertainty. This writer knew the Politburo inside out, but you never knew exactly what was happening, and he indicated that. And just for terminology, I would look, for example, at the New York Times, and everything that they expressed was in terms of certainties.
The excerpt you read, was that by an American author? Just now?
No, British journalists. Yes.
Okay. There's several grievous mistakes.
Oh dear. A fact checker. Before opening up...
Actually, speaking of facts,
yes.
Yesterday I had a conversation with a friend of mine, a very good author called Nourdin Farah, and he was telling me about working with the fact checker at the New Yorker. And the New Yorker then at some point said, you know, you're misspelling your name. I speak actually Arabic, and this is not the way you should spell Nourdin, which means the faith of light. And he quotes a sentence in Somali in this piece. And then the fact checker said, well, your Somali is wrong. And Nourdin says, well, do you speak Somali? He says, no, but I checked it, and this is misspelled. And then Nourdin says, well, first of all, it's a quote. And secondly, this is a certain dialect, southern Somali dialect. So they make these mistakes. I mean, mistakes in terms of that's not kind of highbrow Somali. So you can see actually that if you take factology to great extremes, it actually does become absurd. I mean, there's a point where truth then becomes so irrelevant that you might not take part in that exercise at all.
Because the excerpt from the book, I read the book itself, I mean, I would highly recommend it as one of the best books really about the exchange of populations, and in general as a kind of perspective on history in the 20th century from the Lausanne Treaty on, and the way that was used in the attempts to settle disputes, for example, in the Balkans and stuff. So there might be specific
But when
things.
an author claims that there's a language called Pomak and there is no such language, it's difficult to take the rest seriously.
I will check on that for you, actually.
Well, you don't have to. I'm
yeah.
Bulgarian, and
Yes.
part of my family is Pomak, so I can assure you that there's no language called Pomak.
This is what he says. He says there's no written form, and you say
No.
that it doesn't exist as
No,
a language, as a dialect, or
It's just a Bulgarian dialect.
it's just a dialect.
Well, it's just the Pomaks speak a certain kind of Bulgarian. Even dialect would be too much to say. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, of course, in every region of every country, people speak with different tonalities.
So no, it's a question of nuance then, because
No, but it's not. They're spread all over the country. So the Pomaks in the south would speak a different Bulgarian to the Pomaks in the north, and those in Greece would speak
in
a
that
different.
sense.
Sorry to be sticky with the truth.
No, please. I mean, as I said, be as disagreeable as you like. I mean, I expect.
No, this is actually my agreeable.
So maybe you are sort of like the narrator of Ice Mountain that I was describing earlier, or were you identifying with this? I was surprised how much you identified with him, because I thought it was very much a writer's ploy then to make this character unsympathetic at the beginning in order to maybe really win later.
Well, he is unsympathetic, but I think the reason is not because I've identified with him, but because of literary necessity.
The last question, well, I'll wrap it up with one last question, I guess, which I suppose does go to reality, and I'm sure all of you, yes, do have questions, which is that I personally find it harder and harder to read the news. I mean, it's just such an unpleasant experience. There are so many things that I just don't want to hear about. Any hope that you have in progress, certainly in the United States, in our political process, but throughout the world, is constantly disappointed, and not just disappointed, but things seem to get worse. How do you guys, as writers, write about these terribly unpleasant things? I mean, I want to shield myself, almost like the characters in your training compartment. As writers, do you have to shield yourself from these things? Do you have to expose yourself to them? How do you handle writing about such unpleasant, devastating, tragic, horrible things that are very difficult for me to speak about without getting emotional? Witold, maybe first.
Yeah, I can be, because I work in a newspaper and this is something I really have to deal with. So I just give you an example how I'm trying to deal with it. Next year, it won't be about any tragedy, it's about something we are really proud of, but next year we will have the 25th anniversary of first free election in Poland. So for a journalist, there is very few more boring stories than this one. So we've been having freedom for 25 years. What can you write about? You cannot interview Prime Minister Mazowiecki because he just died a few weeks ago. You can interview Wałęsa, but probably he might say something unusual, as he sometimes does. So what can you do? I was thinking about this a lot because transformation in Poland, it's like my passion, my hobby. I try to, not only in Poland, in the post-communist countries. I have written many articles about that, and I just found a metaphor I want to use to cover that story. I found in Bulgaria there is something what is called a dancing bear park in Belica, in the mountains. Dancing bears were the tradition that the Roma people brought from India all the way to Europe, and some Roma families, they used to own a bear, and had trained them to dance. It was violent training, full of beating and stuff like this. But the bears were dancing, the Roma people were collecting money, and this is how it went for years and years and years. And suddenly, European Union came and said to Roma people, "Come on, guys, you're barbarians, you're violent, you're treating these animals awfully. We are just about to open a park. We are taking your bears. They will be free, they will get good food, and they will be happy." And they did it. And the bears are free, they can hunt, they can hibernate, but whenever they see a man, or whenever they cannot find an answer for something, let's call it a question, something what they have in their head, they start dancing. They start dancing. They've been there for 7 years, and they keep dancing until now. And what I just said, it's a metaphor. For me, it's a metaphor of our transformation in Eastern Europe. And to answer your question, whenever something, as a journalist, because I'm partly writer, partly journalist, whenever I try to write something, I'm doing my best to attract my readers, to do something to bring their attention. Because I know, because I'm a reader myself, I know how bored they might be with news, with media, with what new they might bring. So this is my way to deal with it. I'm just trying to build a metaphor.
Also ich kann ja immer nur hinter die eine oder andere Nachricht genauer blicken, aber ich würde nicht schreiben, wenn ich nicht Empathie entwickeln könnte. Und im Fall von dem Roman, aus dem ich heute vorgelesen habe, war es auch die Unzufriedenheit mit der italienischen Politik. Ich habe mich immer gefragt, wie ein Mann wie Berlusconi überhaupt sich so lange an der Macht halten konnte. Und das hat natürlich Wurzeln in der Nachkriegszeit und im Kalten Krieg. Und im Moment beschäftige ich mich sehr stark mit Lampedusa und mit der Flüchtlingssituation in Italien, mit Kriegsfotografie. Also es gibt immer Fragen, die sich aus der Tagespolitik ergeben, hinter die ich dann blicke und wo ich dann anfange zu recherchieren.
Okay. So it's always only possible to get a glimpse behind one or two of the daily news. And I would not write about these matters, or I only write about matters where I have the chance to really develop empathy for the people involved. The chapter that I started reading today was also, of course, born out of a dissatisfaction with Berlusconi and the question how somebody like him could possibly remain in power for such a long time. And right now I am interested in awakened through Italian politics, in war photography, in the question of refugees, and I am also interested in Lampedusa.
Ilija, to you the last word.
Well, I lead such a privileged life, as most of us do, most of us sitting here, that I don't think I have a right to shield myself. Because those people who are less privileged actually have to live that kind of hell. So I think it will be supremely egoistic and amoral, as someone who has been blessed with so many chances in life, to turn my back to those who are less fortunate. And I've spent most of my life as an author interacting with people whose voices are not heard, whose stories are not told. And my experience is that these people actually expect me to do exactly that, to tell their stories and to give some kind of publicity to their voices. And they sometimes even express it. They sometimes say, they ask me to tell their story. So to shield myself from that would be actually to be a traitor to, I think, to me, the most fundamental aspect of literature.
I'd almost like to close it there on that eloquent note, but I'm sure there are questions from the audience. Are there? I'm not trying to discourage questions at all. I was very moved by what you said. Don't all jump at once? Okay, good job. Well, thank you all very much. And don't forget, the books are available downstairs. There's also a reception hosted by the Romanians, and there are events tomorrow at the Melville House bookstore in Dumbo in the evening, and at the New York Public Library on Saturday afternoon. Thank you.